Hey guys, what's up? Well, I guess it's time to finally get to the Cobra 3 Max. I've taken a little time off and I'll have an explanation further in the video, but as per YouTube protocol, let's just get right to it. From the moment I picked up this printer, I knew its limitations. I had watched enough reviews from other people and unboxings, and I knew what I was going to have to fix. And I already lined up all those fixes before I even purchased the printer. I believe it was just one of two printers that ran on Clipper at the time and had a bed in excess of 400 millimeters. Though Anycubic did its best to neuter this machine, it had community support, which means I could unlock all those barriers that Anycubic put in its way. Now I want to throw this out here pretty quickly because I might forget it later in the video, and I'd rather just get it to you right now. One thing I've noticed, when you load the filament in this machine, if you have a small amount of filament hanging down and still connected to the nozzle, when leveling, is very sensitive. Where most of my printers, if a small piece of filament's hanging down, when you go to level, it will just smash that filament down flat. This printer will not. It will actually tap that piece of filament and go all the way around and create a horrendous Z offset for you. So if you start to have Z offset problems, that's one thing to look out for. I installed Rincall's firmware on this machine, and it was a major game changer. We'll talk about it a little bit more in the later part of this video, but one thing Rincall's really did, since we're on the subject of leveling, is it allowed the printer to just level around the print area. So you didn't have to do a bed mesh on all of the bed. You just did the bed mesh around where you were going to print. And that saved me a ton of time when you're prepping to print something that isn't, 400 millimeters. I think one sticking point for a lot of people is the PTFE tube and the data cable that runs to the print head. If you had the non-multicolor version, well, that sense starts to sag forward and it just kind of hangs there sagging forward. I've seen a lot of people's solutions, from like rubber bands to all kind of crazy stuff, to try to hold that PTFE tube up. But in my case, I haven't done anything. I just let it hang forward. Thus far, I've not had a problem. Now, if it gets worse than it is right now, I may have to try to support it, but right now, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Before I even ordered the printer, I had found some additional nozzles, specifically the 0.6 and the 0.8. One of the things that seems so absurd to me about this printer is that it ships with a 0.4 nozzle. Like, to me, that's crazy. It took literally forever to do prints with a 0.4 nozzle. Now, I will point out that my interest in this printer was for producing large parts, not producing multitudes of parts. Now, I do have a friend of mine that also has a YouTube channel, and that's his concentration, is making a multitude of parts. So I'll give you a link to his profile down below if you want more information about that. But for me, the printer doesn't even turn on unless I have something big to print. And, well, there's lots of times that's been happening lately. Being able to unlock beyond 256 millimeters has been pretty amazing. It's opened the door for me to create some additional designs. I had to decide between the 0.4, the 0.6, and the 0.8 nozzle, which one was actually the best one for my purpose. I took the time to tune in each one of those nozzles and then determine what I felt was best. Even though the 0.8 did put down some fat lines and it did speed up printing quite a bit, I found that the quality I was looking for was best at 0.6. If you're looking for those nozzles, I'll link them down below so you can pick them up for yourself. As we get into Rincalls and installing the firmware, I'll also link that down below so you can download that for yourself. The PEI sheet on this machine is great. I've not had a problem with it. But for the first time in my life, I find myself using glue. Not really because I need it necessarily, but when I'm printing a 400 millimeter wide part on this machine, the last thing I want to do is to be 2 kilograms in and then the corner lift. So just to be safe, I've been using glue. Luckily for me, I bought several of the Adventurer 5Ms and they all come with some glue, so I've probably got a lifetime supply. For the most part, the only filament I really print on this machine is Sunlu PETG, the standard shiny PETG, and their PETG high speed, which happens to be matte. In both of those cases, the Bamboo PETG HF settings work pretty good. In my previous video, I had mentioned to check all the screws on the printer, and I still stand behind that. You should definitely make sure every screw is tight, not just the ones you put in. I am happy to report, though, that after several hours of use, I've not had any problems with this printer at all. The initial setup was a little sketchy. I did have a bent bracket that I had to fix, but other than that, it hasn't really been much of a problem. So let's talk about Ringcall's firmware and why I felt like it was a must. Well, number one, I didn't want to use their neutered version of Orca Slicer. I wanted to use Orca Slicer, the same one I use for every other printer in my little farm. I didn't want to have to use a piece of software just specifically for their hardware. Seemed pretty ridiculous. So Ringcalls does a couple of cool things, and one of them is that it opens up Clipper, so now you can connect to it. After the install, which is pretty basic to be honest, you download the install package, you put it on a USB thumb drive, you have to name a folder a certain number, and then you have to rename the package, I believe. You'll plug it into the machine and then turn it on. Hang on for the ride. That's about it. Now, if you're like me, I prefer Fluid D, but by default, if you go to /Fluid D, you get Mainsail. I'm not really sure why. So if you go to Mainsail, you get Mainsail. If you go to Fluid, you get Mainsail. Didn't make sense. I did figure out that if you go to the printer, now Ringcalls has added an additional menu into the printer, and you can go in there and turn off Mainsail and turn on Fluid D. Now you're good to go. So if you prefer Fluid, that's how you do it. Another thing Ringcalls enabled, which I thought was pretty cool, is the motion to cut the filament. If you don't do the multicolor, and I imagine most of you will probably spring for it, I didn't, you'll know by default that it doesn't go through that movement. And how it unloads filament is by heating it up and then stretching it until it breaks, and then you can pull it out. But I jumped on Anycubic's website and ordered some replacement cutters that were available. When I got them in, slapped them into the print head, and Ringcalls did the rest. Now when I unload filament, it goes over and cuts the filament, and then it pushes it out, and it's easier to unload. You got a nice clean edge on your filament and such that stretched nastiness, which... Now, one of the biggest issues with this printer is that it only comes with a 0.4 nozzle, as we've discussed. It only comes with print profiles for a 0.4 nozzle. So if you decide to pick up that 0.6 or that 0.8, you're 100% on your own. Now, I was looking for maybe a quick solution for that. So obviously trying to set up 2 new nozzles with 0 information to go by seemed like a giant pain in the ass. So what I decided to do was screenshot everything for the 0.4 nozzle, feed it into ChatGPT and say, hey, scale this up for a 0.6 nozzle. It gave me all the data. I copied it back into Orca and then saved the profile. Now, was it perfect? Nah, not even close. But it was close enough that I could do a little bit of tweaking and things were getting pretty solid. So it could be a way to get you close to where you need to be, or you could just scale up the 0.4 settings by duplicating the profile and then, changing what you need to change. I really do like this printer. I think it's hardware-wise fairly solid. Now, do I wish they would have used linear rails? Obviously. But other than that, it's all right. It really hasn't given me too much problem. What I don't understand is why Anycubic would go through all the trouble of locking down and limiting their software or even creating their own version of software. It doesn't make sense. Orca's already out there. Create some profiles, give them to the Orca devs, they'll include it in the software, and you're good to go. Put Clipper on the machine and don't try to lock it down. One of the problems is many of these companies are trying to be Bamboo, right? But the problem is to execute on a Bamboo consumer printer level, it takes a lot of homework. You have to build profiles for every nozzle size that's available for your printer. And you have to try to anticipate what your end users will do. One of the reasons their systems are locked down. But this doesn't work for this printer. No one's grandma is going to buy this printer at over 400 millimeters and say, this is my entry into 3D printing. No, this isn't a consumer printer. This is a community printer. And because of that, it should have came with Clipper normally, wide open, do what you want. It should have been able to be used in Orca right out of the box. And even though the printer itself supports 0.4, 0.6, and 0.8 nozzles, your software didn't. And that just doesn't make any sense. So I would ask, who is this printer for? Because it's not refined enough to be called a consumer printer. It still has a ton of bugs and limitations because the firmware package they created is incomplete. Well, it's not a printer for the community because the first thing the community has to do is replace your firmware. So who is this printer for exactly in your eyes? I think doing your homework and realizing that a 400 millimeter printer is probably a community printer and you should probably give them the tools they need to do what they want to do. In reality, this printer could have been a home run, an absolute home run, if they would have executed correctly. They have printers in their lineup that I can see doing a closed system on. Makes sense, right? You're trying to target consumers with that particular printer. This isn't one of them. This is not that consumer printer. This is a printer for the community and equipped it accordingly. Overall, I'm going to give the hardware an A- because things could be better, but overall, for the size of it, I'm pretty impressed. For the firmware, I'm giving you a D- because this was the wrong execution for firmware and software. Absolutely, and I stand on it. If you're part of our community and you're a regular 3D printer and you've dealt with Clipper machines before, I say buy this thing. I think you're going to have a hell of a good time printing giant parts you've never been able to print before just because you haven't had the millimeters to do it. But if you're an avid Bamboo user and you haven't had to tweak or do certain things before, I don't think this one's quite refined enough yet to call it a consumer printer. All right, guys, well, that wraps up everything I wanted to say about the Anycubic Kobra 3 Max. Now, I just wanted to touch base with my subscribers and talk real quick and say, hey, I apologize for not being around for the last few weeks. I've been working pretty hard on me lately, and that's kind of taken me away from the camera and concentrating more on getting me fixed. And it probably doesn't show yet, but I've been working pretty intensely to get a little healthier and to just live my life a little differently. Now, I'm working YouTube back into that now, but for a short period of time, I kind of had to walk away from it for a minute. I hope you understand. All right, guys, we'll see you next video.